Okay, thank you very much, Gabriel. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. It is really good to have you all here today. You know, I do not take it lightly when I say on behalf of Mr. Hector Negron, our Managing Director, we really appreciate you taking the time out to spend some time with us today as we go through this webinar. Again, I mean, we don't take it lightly when we say that you could have been spending your time elsewhere, but you chose to stay with us. And for that, we're truly thankful. So today we are going to have fun. I mean, data is something that I love. And it is my role to make sure that how I deliver the webinar, that you not only find it interesting, but you're learning. And the fact of the matter is, when we look at the number of attendees that have been attending these sessions, the numbers are really encouraging, which is probably saying that maybe I'm doing something right. So I really hope that you will enjoy it. And I'm going to tell you why we're going to have fun. We are almost to the end. So we're going to be, we have a couple more sessions even after this session today. But what I'm going to be doing is giving you a glimpse of what our end product should now look like. So without any further ado, I'm just going to share my screen. And if I could ask if someone could just quickly confirm if you're able to see the screen, just let me know.
Yes, we can see the screen.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Gabriel. All right. So we're going to be moving on here. So you notice we've been using this diagram to plot our path, as we move to the end result, the end deliverable, which is how to use the Jet Analytics tool to now display your data in all of these dashboards, etc. Because I know in the first couple of sessions, we've been more looking at how to connect to databases, etc. Some data cleansing options available to you in the early stages of your project. Looking at things like data transformation, and then moving your data from the data source into what is called the business units, and then from the business unit now moving into what is called or OLAP services. So as you can see here, again, we looked at the SQL to represent here the various databases that you are able to use with your tool, that tool being the Jet Data Manager. And in using rather the Jet Data Manager to bring in all your data, we're saying now is that this data culminates in what is called a staging database, where the staging database is all your data that has come together, not yet in a pattern or a cube that can be now used for your dashboards, but at least you would have extracted your data. We then said that by using this diagram here, or this icon, to denote the Jet staging database here in the middle, we're therefore saying that the Jet application or the Jet Analytics does not write any data. It does not perform any CRUD operations, CRUD, meaning creating, reading, updating, deleting. It doesn't do any creating, updating, or deleting on your underlying database. But what it does actually is brings all the data based on your filtering conditions into the staging database. So it holds that data in a separate database from your production databases. So therefore minimizing the impact that it would have on your underlying production environment. So where are we today? Today, we're going to be looking at the Jet Data Warehouse and then looking at what is called the Jet Analytics Services as we move to a final destination, which is how to now use this data that we have now created in our projects, and this data that would have applied various data cleansing routines to the data. And therefore, from this, we would have created various cubes. And we'll look at some of the cubes which have already been created to created for you rather, standard by Jet, and how you are able to modify the cubes, recognizing that a cube is simply a representation of all your data that would have been brought in, but it would be organized into some kind of pattern. So that really is a cube. I always tell people, for those who are old enough to know or old enough to remember, you remember the days of the Rubik's Cube, which shows where you have unordered data, but by twisting and turning and weaving, you're able to bring out a pattern. That's really is the idea in the cube. And therefore, by you bringing your data into some kind of cube, this cube is created using your SQL Jet Analysis Services, which is a twinning of the of SQL Server's analytical services. Good. So we're following our diagram. So let's dive right in. So I'm now going to go into our environment, and I'm going to ask just one more time if I can just get a quick confirmation. Well, I'm going to assume that you're able to see. So where are we now? Let me see if I can just move. I can just move this so to create a little space. 1 minute. Right. So you may remember, just a quick, no more than 1 minute to recap. We said that there's a project. You can either create your own project, or you can actually use one of the standard projects with the various cubes, dimensions, the various kind of reports, etc., which have already been designed by Jet. And you are able to access these projects based on your license. And your license will allow you to click on File and go to the Cube Store. And once you open the Cube Store, you will see the various projects which are available to you for download. There are some standard projects for D365 Business Central, standard projects for Dynamics GP, standard projects for D365 for finance and operations, previously known as AX. Good. But even though you can download these projects, please remember that we have said that the projects are there for you to use and modify. So it's very possible that you would have you'd have probably wanted to use a standard measure or a standard report or a standard cube, but you may find that the calculations done by Jet for some of the measures might not necessarily the way how you do it within your environment. So therefore, you have the freedom to either modify some of these measures or actually create your own measures. Now, remember that a measure is some aggregation function. So whenever you hear the word measure in business intelligence or any analytical data processing, just think of a measure being some form of aggregation. And aggregation, as the word suggests, is therefore numeric by nature. So therefore, some of the aggregation functions include counting, the minimum, the maximum, the standard deviation, the average, the moving average, the percentage, etc. So all of these are called measures because they are numeric and you are doing some form of aggregation either across one or a set of numbers. So our final point as we move to just a quick recap. Remember, we said the first thing you do, you identify your data sources. And again, as I'm seeing here, the GP, we're using the GP project for presentation. However, no need to be alarmed. Exactly how you see this window with the various links, etc. It's exactly the same with D365 Business Central, as well as 365 for finance and operations. So you don't have to worry the fact that we're using a GP project. The concept is the same. So we said under the data sources, this is our Jet Data Manager. And on the left here is our Solution Explorer. And we opened, we opened the business unit, which represents the staging database phase of our project. And we said under the staging database, there are two nodes. There are actually two nodes. One node relating to the data source, where you can you can actually see your data sources, and you can create your data source connection using either what is called the standard data adapter, which is the connection configuration to connect to a standard Business Central or GP or Axaptor application. Or if you want to bring in your own data sources within your organization, because maybe you also want to bring in other environmental data, or you might want to bring in data from other data sources in your organization that you believe you should be able to find some relationship between that data and the data in your production system. You're able to do it here with our data sources. Again, as we highlight one of the data sources, in this case, this was our GP. Let's just let it open. You will notice that when you open a data source, you now have a data selection panel on the right-hand side, where once you connect to your production environment or your data sources, you get a list of all the databases that are accessible to you within your production databases. And therefore the ticks on the right are these ticks in these nodes. It's telling you that this database, or this table rather, has been selected. So therefore you have done now your first selection or your first data cleansing, in your ETL, your extraction, transformation, and loading processes, in that you have selected only those tables which are necessary for your project. So while you would have been connected to the database and having access to a ton load, a myriad of tables, we're saying that in your first step, in your extraction, transformation, and loading process and your data cleansing, is to make sure that you only select the tables which are necessary for your project. So in this case, there's a table called GL01201, which is not needed for this project. So therefore, there's no check mark beside that node. But even though you may have the ability to select a table, if I were to increase this node or to expand this node, we're actually saying that you're seeing a field list for the table with ticks beside each of the fields that you want to bring into your project. So not only can you select a table, but you can select specific fields within your tables. Good. So that's how you start the first step of your ETL, and that is to select only the table and the fields which are necessary. And once you select your tables and fields which are necessary, then they are listed here under the data source. And if we were to look, for instance, at GL00201, Let's see if I can find it. Here it is, right? GL00201, and I expand the node. You'll notice that although I've selected the table, the only thing that is listed under the data sources would have been the 5 fields that I would have selected here in the data selection. So therefore, whilst I've brought over the table, I have not brought over all the fields. And by not bringing over the unnecessary fields, what I'm doing is making sure I can keep my project as tight as possible as far as the data that I'm bringing over. So therefore, I'm not wasting disk space. And as I select my tables and do a compilation, that data is now copied over into the staging database. And you may remember that last week, when we spoke about the staging database, when we looked at the nodes, we actually said that if you expand the tables node, you will actually see that there are 3 types of tables. There are some tables which are denoted with a yellow grid color, and some with a purple grid color, and some in black and white, as can be noted here. So therefore, what's the difference between the 3? We said last week that those in black and white, those tables listed in black and white, are those tables which are connected to the data source node down here. So in other words, we're saying that those tables exist in the data sources, which therefore exist in your underlying database, your production databases. So you may ask then, what then would be these tables in purple? Well, these tables that are in purple would now be customized tables that you would have created within the project itself. So whenever you see these tables listed in purple, what you should get from this is that these are tables that are not found in the production database, but actually were created in your JET project repository, because there is a possibility that you might want to create tables which it's not in your production environment, but it's necessary to be used as part of your project development, maybe to be used as a dimension, or maybe to use it to get certain measures, etc. So you have the ability to do that. And then, interestingly, those in yellow, we said, are date-based tables. So 90% of any analytic computation or any dashboard reporting, it tends to be temporal, that is time-based. So whether you use a continuous time along a time series or for a specific date in time, most dashboard reporting, as far as business intelligence is concerned, tend to be temporal in nature. So therefore, if your underlying database does not have a date-related table, then you have the ability to create the table. So we're looking here, we're saying that in last session, we created the tables and we did one for dates. And again, if you expand the nodes, you realize that these are all the various fields. For example, for the date, and if you want to browse, you can just simply right click and you'll get a context sensitive help menu, and I can select preview table and I'm seeing my data. So where do we go from here? Well, the next step from the staging database is now to look at your data warehouses. So I'm going to open this node, which represents the data warehouse. And it's at the data warehouse stage that you are now able to do further refinement on your tables, maybe apply additional filters, And a lot of the functionality that is available for you in the GP data warehouse, they're also available to you at the staging database level. One additional thing that you're able to do is do what is called create views. So you may, for those of you who are familiar with the SQL environment, you would know what a view is, but maybe for those of you who do not know, a view is simply a series of SQL code that is run against a set of data tables in order to display data. That's why it's called a view. So the view, the difference between a view and a table is this. Whereas a table consists of fields with underlying data already inserted in the table, a view does not keep data permanently. A view is just simply a piece of code that, when executed, will create data for display. Good. So some persons like using views because what a view does, it prevents your database from expanding. And really what it does, it prevents you from having data all over the place and having to maintain it in tables. But by creating a view, which is just simply a set of code that is actually executed to run the data, to run the code against your underlying data or database tables, it will now display the results for you to be able to use in building reports, etc. So you have the ability to create views. You also have the ability to even create additional tables at the data warehousing level. Good. Now, at the data warehousing level, one of the features and functionalities, and we won't for today's session go through it, you are able to apply different security levels against your data tables, meaning you are able to put your users from Active Directory in certain permission groups and thereby limit who is able to view certain tables or view certain cubes. And therefore it allows you to apply security levels against your data so that if you have confidential data, people won't be able to view your data. Good. You're also able to do what is called scripts, where you're able to write scripting languages or scripting codes, for instance, in SQL or DAX or Power Query M. Those of you who are familiar with DAX and know that DAX, the acronym meaning Data Analysis Expression, which is a programming language built for business intelligence. But if you're not familiar with DAX, don't worry, you really don't need to do development for most of your reports. So this basically is the data warehouse. Now I'm going to close the business unit node so that we're able to see or have more space. And I think it's good that we go immediately into the final level, which is the OLAP. Good. Now the acronym OLAP, what does OLAP means? It means online analytical processing. And this is where everything happens inside the OLAP. Now, OLAP does not run on your SQL database engine. OLAP, however, runs, yes, on SQL, but it runs within SQL Server Analytical Services. Good. So when you install the product automatically creates a database within your analytical services environment. And what has been done here is this particular node for the OLAPs or the cubes, it's named Jet OLAP. And just like the others, you can go through and edit the OLAP server and enter all the requisite information for connection. So at the end of the day, where do we want to get to? In the OLAP mode, this is where you are seeing now all your cubes which have been developed, your dimensions, and also what is called script actions. But for all webinars, we'll be concentrating on these two key areas, a cube and a dimension. So what is a cube? Unlike the data tables or the databases which were created in the earlier nodes, the data tended mostly to be disorganized. It was just brought into tables. However, with your cubes, you're expecting that your data is now more organized. Good. So a cube, under the cube node, you'll be seeing the various cubes which have been created. Now for this standard project, which was developed for you by JET, there are cubes relating to finance, inventory, payables, purchasing, receivables, sales, meaning under the sales cube, for instance, you'll be finding measures and scripts and tables that only relate to the sales function. Likewise, receivables, you're saying when you're building the receivables cube, you only need the tables that are related to the accounts receivables function. And why is this important? It allows you to only extract and build the data which is necessary, right, for the particular activity, for example, in sales. So you can assign users based on security settings to only the sales cube. So therefore, people who are probably sales managers or sales officers or sales agents will only see sales related data and not necessarily be exposed to finance related data. So if I should expand the sales cube, for example, what are we seeing here? You're seeing now 3 additional nodes where we're seeing that there's one for measures, one for scripts, and one for dimensions. So let's go through this slowly, patiently, so that we get this. In order for you to get a good understanding of the cubes, it will be important for me to go back just a little to our JET data warehouse and to expand the tables. So remember now at the JET data warehouse, this is where we are now having all our tables. And let me just bring across some more here so that you're able to see. Good. So under my data warehouse node, I'm seeing a list of all my tables. Good. All the tables that would have been brought into our project, as you're seeing here, as displayed by this list of tables in the JET data warehouse. However, in moving on to OLAP, if I should right-click the sales cube and then left-click, edit the cube, what I'm seeing here, and I'll move this over, I'm only seeing those tables that I want to select to be a part of my cube. So whilst I still have the entire list within the cube, which is the listing in the entire data warehouse on the left-hand side, I'm saying, however, that for my sales cube, I'm only selecting these 5 tables to make up my sales cube. So my sales cube consists of the inventory valuation table, the sales charge transactions table, the sales commission transaction table, the sales finance transactions table, and the sales transactions table. And I want you to get this point, what I'm going to say now. A table that is selected to be part of a cube, these tables are called fact tables, F-A-C-T, fact table. So a fact table is a table that has been selected from the data warehouse and now being used to design your cube. So why the name fact table, which is a standard name in business intelligence? Well, as the name suggests, a fact table is where all your facts reside. Good. So the fact table, being the table where all your facts reside, it is the fact table that you will now use to calculate and develop your measures. So let me say it again now, coming from the reverse end. You develop your measures against fact tables, and your fact tables are the tables which have been selected from your data warehouse. So as we're stepping through, we're going through in stages, stepwise. So we have the long list of tables, and here are the tables that have been selected. And once they're selected, they're now known as fact tables. So if you are doing any further development, and for whatever reason you might need to add an additional table, you can just simply click and select the tables that you need for your project. Good, so I'm going to unselect it because I'll get an error when I compile. But just to note as we close this, that under a cube, when you assign tables from your data warehouse to your cube, those tables which have been assigned, those tables which have been selected are now known as fact tables, because this is where all your facts reside. And it is against your fact table that you create measures which will be used in your reporting. All right. Now, your sales cube has some other nodes, and you'll find here now a node called measures. If I should explode that node, see if I can get this out a little bit more, maybe not. Good. So here are my measures. You may remember we said that your measures is where you create your aggregates, and they tend to be numerical in basis. So therefore, here we have several measures which have been created for you. The commission, cost of sales, document count. So you'll notice now this is a counting aggregate that is being done. You're also looking at your extended costs. So all of these measures are numeric in basis. And you can either edit a measure, or you can actually create a measure. If I should right-click measure, right, you will see that there are 3 types of measures here. One which is called a standard measure, which is just a simple aggregation that you would want to conduct against a particular field. or you have what is called derived measures or calculated measures. For those of you who are familiar with statistics or maybe some other business intelligence tools, the difference between a derived measure and a calculated measure is simply this. A calculated measure is actually done or computed rather while you are developing your cube. However, a derived measure is a measure that is calculated while a report is being run. So there are some measures which are calculated at the stage of cube development, but there are some measures which you would rather prefer that these are calculated at the back end. In other words, while the report is actually being displayed on screen. So that's the difference between a calculated measure as against a derived measure. So we're seeing here that these are some measures, and in our next webinar session, we'll go through the measures and how you calculate some of these measures. But suffices to say, the measures node is one of the nodes under your cube, in this case, a sales cube. So if I were to open the receivables cube, you'll see also the same thing, measures, scripts, and dimensions. But what are these dimensions? Good. You may remember in previous webinars, we said a dimension offers you perspective. Good. So you have always heard the adage where it is said, you have a glass half empty as against the glass half full. So depending on which perspective you look at the glass might seem to you as if it's half empty, but from another perspective, it is half full, but it is the same level of water in the glass. Good. So that is what a perspective does. It provides a dimensions rather, the dimension node, what it does, it provides you with some perspective as to how you analyze your data. So if I should open the dimensions node, well, what are we seeing here? Well, the fact that the dimension node is under the sales data, and I want you to watch this reasoning now. You're saying that the dimension called salesperson gives you a perspective of your sales data using any of the measures that have been applied against the sales data. So if we were to look at, say, for instance, a profit, which is a measure, some aggregate, so maybe like total profit. So let me just close this. So what we're saying here is that you are able to use the dimension called salesperson when you're doing your reporting, which will give you a perspective by salesperson against your sales cube, and also applying the measure cost or profitability, those various measures that you have. So what has been developed for you is this. Under the dimensions node, these are the dimensions, which is the perspective. Salesperson, maybe you might want to see something based on analyze some attribute or some measure of sales using the bill to address. Maybe you might want to look at some analysis or perspective of sales with its measures, but from a ship to address perspective. Or let me say it another way. You might want to analyze sales, but some measure that is within sales and conducting it from the perspective of location. So that maybe you want to see how are your sales based on the location? So therefore you may realize that Caribbean sales, Eastern Caribbean sales is probably much better than from the Northern Caribbean, etc., or from the Americas. Or you might want to look at your sales, applying certain measures against your sales data from the perspective of the customer. So therefore, you are able to see all your customers and the relevant sales. And that is the idea. So you may ask then, how do you develop dimensions? And you'll notice under the OLAP node, there is a node called dimensions. And it is this dimensions node which has all the various dimensions which have been created for you. So you can apply a dimension to any of your cubes. So let's see, you could, for instance, apply the customer dimension against the sales, as we have seen. But maybe you could also apply the same customer dimension against your receivables. So just as how in sales, we were able to see the customer dimension, let us see if receivables also has the same dimension. Yes, here it is, customer. Good. So these dimensions, good, which have been applied against the receivables, good. These dimensions also can be found, or some of these dimensions can be found under the sales cube. Why? Because they're all coming from the pool of dimensions. Good. So in our next session, we're going to show you how all of this comes together, but I'm going to give you a sneak preview. So let us look again at our sales. So I'm just going to close all of these nodes. So now we know that we're looking at OLAP, Online Analytical Processing. We're under the OLAP node, which is for where your analysis services data resides. There are two nodes, one node called cubes, one called dimensions. We said that the dimensions contains your pool of perspectives. A dimension is a perspective. And in the next session, we'll show you how to develop these perspectives. But let's go back to our story. We say here that under the cubes, if I were to expand the cubes node, I'm seeing here 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 cubes which have already been developed. So the cube, if you should open the node for the cube, has measures, script commands, and dimensions. We don't need to know anything about the scripts for this webinar, but the measures contains all the various calculations, these calculations being known as aggregates or aggregations, where some of these calculations are probably summation, some of them are average, some maybe minimum, some maybe maximum, etc. Some may be first, some may be last. So in other words, the first data or the last data. Some may be standard deviation, variance, etc. All of these can be done. And against these measures, you are able to see or apply perspectives. So I'm going to highlight the sales cube and right-click the sales cube. And when I right-click the sales cube, you will see from our drop-down, or rather our context-sensitive help or menu, you'll notice that there is an option which says Browse Cube. So I want to browse the sales cube which I've highlighted. So if I should click Browse Cube, Just give it a second to come up. Good. Now we're coming to a very interesting stage of our project. Good. So in using the option to browse the cube, what you're able to do is this. You are able to look at the data and analyze the data to see if your data looks good, and just to make sure you can eliminate anything that may look quirky or stuff. So by you browsing the cube, you are able to look at your data and make any necessary corrections before you actually deploy the cube to be used by users within the organization. Remember, the users in your organization will use, some may use Excel, and then in using Excel, they might be able to create pivot tables or reports which are just tabular in nature, or to use charts, etc. Good. Or you may have in your organization, you may have probably Power BI, or if not Power BI, you may have any other kind of reporting tool that is able to connect to your SSAS environment and to pull these cubes in. So you're not only limited to Excel or Power BI, you can use any of your favorite end user tools, as long as these tools are able to connect to your SSAS, your analysis services environment, and which we will hopefully do, if not in the next session, but in the session afterwards. So we have at least 2 sessions as we're now winding down. So here we are in the Cube browser. So what are we able to do with the Cube browser? You may remember I said to you here, we chose the sales cube. Let me see if I can bring this down. If you're looking in the background here, you'll see there's our sales cube. So everything that is listed under our sales cube within our JET environment is now listed here in our cube browser. So you may remember we had the sales cube. Good. And under the sales cube would have been the measures. So we have a measure for inventory valuation, sales charge transactions, finance transactions, etc. Good. But not only do we have the measures, we now have the dimensions. Good. These dimensions, remember when we chose customer? Good. So this listing is a listing of all the dimensions that have been assigned, good, against the cube. So we're going to conduct some analysis right now. So I can select and hold my customer because I want to probably view my customer information by row. And as I put one perspective, which is the country perspective by row, you'll notice that the display screen on the left begins to automatically format. So right now we have the country, or rather the customer. So if I should open the customer node, let's just open it and see. Good. So I'm able to see my customer by region. So let me open again the customer. So my dimension, customer dimension, allows me to look at data by country, by state, by city, by customer class, by sales territory, by salesperson, etc. Good. So you can select dimensions with what is called multi-level focus. So you're able to see dimension groupings. So far, by me just selecting in my rows by country, by state, I'm therefore able to see, okay, for all my customers, I'm able to look at them, those in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the USA. If I were to probably open the USA node, see if I can just open it. Ouch. Good. So USA now opens, and I'm able now to see the state. So therefore, Illinois, etc., Kansas, Michigan, etc. And as you open each node, good, see I'm getting now the cities, and then even opening further. So therefore, under the Arlington Heights, good, I'm able to see the two customers, good. So you're seeing the various levels. So I'm now going to contract these and come back to my customer. But not only do I want to see it by country, maybe I want to analyze my sales by salesperson as well. So I want another perspective or another dimension. And this dimension now I want by columns. And you'll notice now as I now put the by salesperson, and I'm now seeing the data by column. So if I should now expand, let's say I might not be able to see it until I put in some data. Let's just check this for a minute and see. Good. So here I'm seeing the listing of all of my salesperson in columns. So therefore, my final grid that I'd like to use here in the bottom right, which says measures, this is where I would put the measures which would have been our calculated aggregates or the aggregation. And maybe for my measure, what I might want to look at is sales transactions. And maybe for my sales transactions, maybe I will look at the profit. So I would like to analyze the profit. So I click and hold and put it in measures. And now that I've done that, I now have a more perfect grid where I'm saying here for all my customers against all my salespersons, my profit was 1,176,542. But I'm able to open each of my perspectives, each of my dimensions. So by opening up my customers, I'm now able to see that Australia, Canada, New Zealand, USA has the following. And maybe I might want to now open to do an analysis using my salespersons. So I'm able to see that Francine Bergeron has been doing a lot of the sales in Canada, etc. So you get the idea. Good. So you're able to conduct, using the Cube browser, analysis of your dimensions which should have been applied against your cube, and the measures which would have been calculated against your cube, remembering that the cube shows only those tables which have been selected from your data warehouse. And those tables which have been selected from your data warehouse, those tables are called fact tables. And the fact tables, therefore, contains your raw data to which measures have been applied against the raw data and presented using dimensions or perspective. And once you have gone through and checked that everything looks good, you would now go through a deploying and execute process, which would now make the cube available to your wider audience, your wider user group. And they would use their favorite tool, whether Excel, as we said, or Power BI, etc., to now analyze the data and to make the necessary reporting. So in the next session, we'll be looking at the various types of measures, how to create those measures. We'll probably create a few measures. And we'll also look at the dimensions, how to create dimensions and also to use dimension hierarchies. Remember, with a hierarchy, you may have, for instance, the countries, and then within the countries, the cities, and maybe within the cities, the parishes, etc. So therefore, those are called hierarchies. So I am hoping that we were able to whet your appetites. Again, I just like to say, we really appreciate you spending the time with us. We know that your time is precious, but you chose to spend it with us. I see some names that I really recognize: Joshua, Naphtali, Otis. I want to say thank you all for coming, and I hope that you enjoyed today's session. Remember, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact Gabriel or anyone from Optimus, as we'll be more than willing to assist you. So until then, I'd just like to say thank you all, and see you at our next training session. So be on the lookout for the notice from the team, and you'll be advised as to the next session. Thank you all for coming, and really appreciate it. Have a great day. God bless.